Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our fourth and final session of Knowledge is Power, and this session is called Designing to Design. It's actually one of my favorite sessions to put together, so I appreciate that you are here for these 15 minutes, and I think that I've gotten positive feedback on the venue, which is like a short 15-minute sort of piece, and then hang out and talk a little bit if you want to, and then be on and go on with your day. I think at this point in time, and I'm actually going to go into it right now, is that we are really full. And I stopped. We are really full. Our brain is very full, and there's a lot of brain science that will say, yes, you are. So this comes from my desire to have really healthy teams. I'm a big believer, and that's actually how I try to run my organizations whenever I was in charge of them, is that our team health matters. And so right now, what I'm seeing is a lot of us in education are coming together to dream of, create, design new ways of being come fall. And what I'm concerned about is that we're not paying enough attention to our own health. So under normal circumstances, even if there is some sort of tragedy or some sort of event and we're in school, it happens to be like to the community. And then we're coming in, because we usually don't live in the community that we serve. We come in and we try to create a healthy environment. This particular time and space that we are in now, we are actually also experiencing what everyone else is experiencing at different rates, but we are also in that space. Now, I wanted to add a little bit of a disclaimer. When I was designing these 4 sessions, it really was about the pandemic and COVID. And then, of course, as you know, our current civil rights movement also just sparked in a really great, beautiful global way. And so I don't mean to be tone deaf. It's not that I'm not addressing it. It's going to be woven in, but I want to be more intentional. So coming soon will be another 4 sessions really based on Black Lives Matter and our current civil rights movement. So I just wanted to make sure to say that. So I love this quote because it emphasizes everything. I can be very critical of education, but I'm also really in awe of our current state of being able to quickly pivot, adapt to change, support students, serve the community without a bailout. Like, wow, we were able to do that really quickly and nimbly. And so, I always like to add, and yes, and with a budget cut. So one of the reasons why this is important, though, is because what we did was beautiful, but it was an emergency. So the things that we provided for families and for students really wasn't remote learning. It was emergency remote learning. And so what this session is talking about today is how we now have some time, not a lot, but some time to actually think through and really be intentional in our design and really think about how we're going to welcome and re-engage students in a healthy way. Now, you should also have some data. And what I mean by that, and I'm not talking about literacy or numeracy, I'm talking about experiencing during this remote time. So you have the data of which teacher is more nimble than the other, which students are actually engaging in the work, because there was getting the Chromebooks, being connected, engaging, and then there's a quality of, right? So there's a couple of different things that you should know now that emerged from these last few weeks. So now it's the time to think about, how am I going to be intentional? How are we going to be intentional in designing a beautiful re-engagement space for students? So here's what this is mostly about, is our current state isn't the healthiest. So we are living through a global pandemic. We have a very charged civil rights movement. I'm actually very concerned about Tulsa, Oklahoma this weekend. So I'll be actually probably saying a protection prayer over everybody. We're currently in risk negotiation all of the time. So when we do go out, whether or not, and I don't understand the politicization of masks, but whenever we go out, we're assessing our risk. Crossing the street, if we see a group of people that aren't wearing masks, or vice versa. So we're really kind of in constant risk negotiation that's taxing on our brain. We're usually not oriented in that way. There's change in everyday normal behavior. And what I mean by that is even getting groceries delivered or anything like that. You're cleaning your hands, you're not touching your face. There's a lot of changes in our behavior. And then of course the Zoom gloom. And I want to go into the Zoom gloom a little bit more than usual, because it's not just about the blue light and the sitting in front of a screen. It's actually a lot deeper than that. I have put this slide up at every presentation, and I'm going to keep saying it because I wanted to make sure that we are really knowledgeable about the level of impact and trauma that we're living through. So there's 4 layers of trauma. There's personal, vicarious, collective, and historical, and we are currently sitting in all of it. And so whether it's economic impact, health impact, routines impact, quality of life impact, all of it is being impacted. And then of course, if you layer our civil rights movement, we're also being impacted in this way. So there's several layers of multi-dimension complexity of trauma that's happening to our brain and to ourselves right now. So calling this forced adaptation, because working from home was definitely a forced adaptation for many of us who are lucky and privileged enough to be able to work from home. So we've been developing this pandemic persona, because now that we're in the 2-dimension space, we have to emote more. You would probably, if you've done any of the Zoom happy hours, you can see how we all talk over each other. It's really hard to kind of maintain because we don't have those social cues that we normally would have when we are in person. There's also Zoom fatigue, and this is the part that I wanted to get really into the space. So there's a couple of articles that I linked, one from the Wall Street Journal and one from National Geographic, that talk about how if we were in a meeting, if all of us were in a meeting together right now, we would have one environment and one speaker. And I would have a view of all of you, but it would be one environment, and I can actually hone in, right, and make eye contact with several people. Now, when we're on Zoom, it's about 20 different environments, depending on the largeness of who's on the screen, 20 different faces, including our own, which is really weird, by the way, to be watching yourself talk all of the time. We don't ever really look in the mirror that long. And so all of these little things, usually that your brain would get in periphery information, is right up front. So your brain is constantly collecting this data, and that is why you're so exhausted. So it's more about how much information your brain is collecting than the blue screen time. It also talks about how, group chats are less collaborative. Our brain becomes overwhelmed. We can't find the normal nonverbal cues that we seek all of the time from body language. And then the last article, which I know got a lot of press when it first came out, is that we're grieving. We were forced to adapt in many different ways. And so the loss of routine, I know I'm grieving just going to work, like waking up and changing and putting on a dress and driving away. I miss that, and I didn't think I would, and I really do. So there's a lot of changes in our life that are forcing us to grieve in very different ways. And then, so here's my concern is implicit bias, which we all have. Our brain is biased. Our brain is biased because our brain is very efficient. It's very efficient in the data that it receives, and then it kind of stores it, and that's how we act out. So usually, for implicit bias to come out and manifest itself is because it's taking shortcuts and we're acting too quickly. Well, guess what? If you are grieving, if you're experiencing trauma, your brain is going to make these shortcuts for you because it's the healthiest thing. So now think about this. You're planning and designing for students, you're grieving your trauma, and it's ripe ground for this implicit bias. So this is the part that I'm thinking it's going to come out. It's not going to be malintended, but we're going to start just replicating old paradigms over and over again. When you receive a copy of this PowerPoint, if you ever want to nerd out, this particular graphic, every little line right here are all of the studies that have been done on our brain and the biases we hold. And I kind of do it like a little oracle and go to one, and it's really interesting to read what it does, because most of the time I go, oh yeah, I do that. So one of the things that happened was I was in a meeting where educators said, well, let's dream of a new way. Let's dream of a new way of welcoming students. And although I love that positive frame, I'm mostly like, that's my jam. That's usually where I lean into. I try to find the positive aspects of it. All I could think of was, I can barely sleep. I can't dream of a new way if I could barely sleep. So what can we do? First of all, let's normalize our new normal in our routine. If there's kids or pets or significant others that make these Zoom cameos, I know this morning when I was doing this 8:30, there was a lot of noise coming from my household. Yes, on Wednesday's session, my son barged in while we were recording. It just happens. Let's just normalize it, and let's give ourselves permission to stop video when needed, because sometimes it is necessary for us to just remove ourselves from the space and go and do something else, even if it's just to take a little breather outside. Communication during a crisis is also very important. A lot of people try to carry on as normal. I know I've seen this happen in teams where everyone's just pretending nothing's going on. please acknowledge the crisis and give voice to the concerns, because it's very real. We're in very different conditions right now. There's also bad news that is coming down, unfortunately, especially with budgets, especially with planning for next year, with all of the feedback from stakeholders and the concerns that are happening. Let's not hide it. We got to be upfront. We got to be transparent. We got to talk about it. We have to put it on the table and actually really think about how everyone's feeling and what everyone's thinking. So again, continuing with the what might we do, acknowledge that things aren't normal. This isn't the time to put on a smile and pretend that everything is. Establishing a really good routine for communication and sharing is important, and also allowing flexible schedules with asynchronous communication. I think right now, especially when people are socially distancing themselves, it becomes almost like an othering from the group. And so just even that term is othering. So how might we pay more attention and be more intentional about really communicating? Agree on what it means to be a good digital colleague and create pandemic norms. So I know many of you have created norms with your groups. They're probably hanging on some wall in some collaboration room. Guess what? You're on a totally different task now in totally different conditions. So I really think the creation of pandemic norms of how we want to be during this time is really important to do so. Kind of bubbling up with what I said earlier, encourage transparency and inclusion. I was talking to a group of teachers, and there was a few young teachers that are living by themselves, and they stayed around afterwards, and they actually said, I live alone, so I'm actually lonely. So this piece of like social isolation and self-isolation, especially with people who live alone, I think is very necessary to ensure that there's transparency and inclusion and almost an invitation to be a part of teams and discussions. Considering healthy check-ins and check-outs, I'm a big proponent of this. I think I wrote an article right in the beginning of this. It's really important for our team health to check in. I have two very simple questions that I ask my team, which is, what are you bringing today? And what do you need from the team? There's an article that I will link that talked about the importance of rituals, because it makes us feel safe to establish your routine. And so what I do want to warn you though, is if you've never done something like this before and you ask that question to your team, they're either going to be silent or they're going to talk a lot. And so I know the feedback I get is, I can't check in every time. This took like 25 minutes and it's only an hour meeting. That means that they had a lot to empty. And the more routine you get into it, the quicker it's going to be, because you're going to get used to however often you meet, like, oh, we're going to do a check-in. I know what I'm going to say. I know what I want to share with the team, and they're going to be a little bit quicker. So don't let that set you off from doing a healthy check-in with your team. Intentionally leveraging other identities. So currently we're all kind of living in this space of being all of the identities at the same time, right? So normally, under normal circumstances, I drop off my son, so my mother role would be on pause, and I'd go to work and I would be educator self. And then when I'd come home, I wouldn't be educator self, I would be mom self, wife self. Currently, I'm doing all three all at the same time, and I'm negotiating through those three roles all day long. So why not bring them into the room? If we're planning a design, what does my parent perspective say? What does my wife perspective say? What does my small business owner perspective say? And that will diversify also the types of things that you're thinking about, like some healthy questions to promote diverse points of view, like, let's argue with this idea that was just presented. If you don't take anything that I've said today, I'm gonna please take this one. You need to intentionally establish healthy feedback loops for whatever you're doing. And I say that because it builds your credibility, it builds your supportive structures, and people are more akin to actually take some risks in their practice if they know that in a week and a half or 2 weeks, someone's going to check in and we're going to come back and talk about the things that emerged that maybe we weren't planning, and so then create some changes. It becomes a really nice, healthy way of being innovative and taking information from the field and really being open to the user's perspective. So again, if anything, if you don't take anything home except for that one, I'll be so happy, because just in general, I think education needs healthier feedback loops all across, from the superintendent all the way down to the classroom. Lastly, be okay with leaving or asking for homework. I can't read this anymore. Can I just take it and come back tomorrow? I'll read it before I go to bed and think about it. And I think it's okay to ask for that time, because we are really overwhelmed, as I made the point earlier. So I'm going to end with this. I love this belief The Chinese believe that before you can conquer a beast, you must first make it beautiful. What you're about to do to redesign the way school is with, I've got the parent survey, so I know you're thinking about virtually or in the classroom or a combination of both, whatever it may be, it's a beast. So really paying attention and spreading that compassion and that love and the care for your internal team first. Again, do the airplane thing first. You put your mask on before you help anyone else. Make it beautiful for your team. I know this was a lot of information and I felt like I needed to write about it. So I linked an article that I published. And everything that I said is actually in here, and it has a lot of other information as well, because like I said, I know I did not address our current civil rights movement, but I did put, and I don't mean to make you dizzy, I'm scrolling down. So we're trying to redesign, and so I pose this question. So you want to address internal inequities as you design? Here's some questions for you to ponder as well when you come together as a team. So again, I know this was a very heavy topic, but I hope that the 15 minutes gave you a taste and that you're curious enough to click on all of the links of the articles, including the one I wrote. And I hope that you're able to design a space for all of the designers to come in and design from a very healthy space for themselves. So that concludes our 15 minutes. I will hang around and see if you have any questions or want to talk a little bit more about anything that has emerged.